All right, everyone. Well, welcome and thank you for being at ICE today and also attending this particular session. What I want to do really quick, everybody just kind of, depending on where you're sitting, kind of take a look around and make sure that you know everybody in the room. Because, no, seriously, one of the most important things really about these events in here is the networking component. We can't just kind of all sit here in silos and all of that. So if you haven't met, just take a few minutes to kind of shake hands with folks, at least get to know a name and where they're from, and then we'll go ahead and we'll get started.
Kevin, not so much you, with the meeting and the people, no. That was pretty slick what you just did there.
Cool.
I'm doing fine.
We're stalling.
All right, we got everybody kind of all introduced and the like.
Very smart.
All right, and for those of you, I think actually we are being recorded on the live stream and all of that. So for those listening remote, that was just organized chaos just a second ago here and all of that.
Though.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and get started and all there. The title of what we're going to be talking about is up there. I don't need to read it to you and the like. And what we'll do as we begin this is we're going to kind of just introduce ourselves via the slide deck a little bit as we talk about the respective organizations that we're from. And then we'll kind of get into the meat of the matter really of the presentation. So I'm Perry Kirwan. I'm the Vice President of Technology Management ENTECH for Banner Health System. Our system is based out of Phoenix, Arizona. We operate in 5 states, about 32 hospitals now, more clinics and ambulatory sites than I can count, so a true integrated healthcare delivery network. Our predominant footprint and all of that is in the state of Arizona, and we have quite a bit of coverage in there and the like. And I just kind of put up a little bit some of statistics about our organization in there. So again, I think you can see a little bit of the size and breadth. We are a not-for-profit. And so we do a lot of charity care. Probably of all the things on this slide, that's the thing that I'm the most proud of. And there we go with the fast click.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so this is actually our physical geography footprint and the like, and a little bit of statistics about us. We have about $1.8 billion of asset under management, so a pretty good size organization. The one thing that I do think makes our program unique, so we are an in-house program at Banner, but we run a commercial enterprise inside of that in-house program under the name ENTECH. And so we are rare in that we're a corporate entity that derives revenue in there, which is good. It actually lowers our operating costs related to the organization. So we do not run that structure like a classical ISO, but other than that, it behaves like one a bit. And so the net result of the model is really called a shared services organization if you look at it from the in-house side. So the revenue basically just goes back to Banner, lowers the overall cost of services that we provide Banner, and a little bit of other statistics and the like. The scope of our services in here in our department, so you can see it's fairly comprehensive. It is a soup to nuts asset management company all the way, So we're involved from things really before they're even being conceived, even before purchasing in there, as we're doing a lot of planning. We follow that through the sales process when we buy things. We have a team that does FF&E work, right, or furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So they help us get things installed. But we also do work that you would normally find in an architectural firm, and we're able to absorb that in-house as well. As you would expect, all of the break, fix, and normal support of medical devices, along with a couple other little new quirks along the way. I think all of us realize that medical devices are becoming, the need is out there from a business and clinical perspective to integrate more highly. So if it's inbound or outbound from a medical device to something else in the world of IT, that happens through our division. For cybersecurity, probably one of the newer topics in our industry, folds nicely under that particular group, and then all the way through the disposition of stuff. And then we have a couple of other interesting little services like videography and the like, where we do a lot of virtual and augmented reality, not in the service arena where you might expect, but in the clinical education side. So we build simulations in there for physicians, nurses, caregivers, or whole operating room settings or labor and delivery settings and all of that, so that we can simulate problems and the care team can kind of interact really in a virtual environment, make the mistakes when you're not really hurting anybody. That's kind of the idea behind the simulations. Okay, and there I go again with my heavy-handed click mode. Wow.
Yeah.
I went beyond 3. Very, okay, and I would be remiss in there if I didn't say that we have a lot of openings going on in here. So if you have friends and they're looking to come to Arizona, which is really where I have most of my openings and all of that in there, yeah, let them know about us. We have a lot of, and you can see in there, and just a raise of hand for those of you that are in healthcare organizations. Anybody struggling with staffing, or is that a banner issue? Yeah, okay. All right, I figured it was going to be really unique territory and the like. So actually, it's tax advantageous, but the thing that we struggle with the most right now is the cost of housing. That is probably my biggest recruiting barrier.
Because of all the
right
California people moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
California guys.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So you guys can relate to that out of Cali, or if anybody's in the Pacific Northwest, it's kind of the same dynamic. Absolutely. Okay. Anyway, probably the only big takeaway here is at the bottom of the slide. That is my email. So if I say something totally ridiculous today and you want to call me out and you're afraid to do it here in a room, which you're welcome to, by the way, there's my email. You can ask any questions that you like about Banner, about this presentation. You can make funny comments. If anybody knows a good joke or anything like that, that's where we're going to send it to at the end of the day. All right, let's see if I can do this. Okay, and at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime here a little bit to introduce himself. So I apologize for blocking the screen here.
Wow. That's amazing. So these positions are also open at Renovo. So if I say something silly today, just remember my name is Perry Kirwan. There's my I cannot, there's a middle slide in here, so we're going to skip it, I guess. So Renovo Solutions. Hi, my name is Dan Adams. I'm with Renovo Solutions. I'm the Director of Imaging Service for the western part of the United States. One of my partner in crime is actually here, Kevin Vandegren, who's in charge of the eastern part of the United States. So Renovo was conceived in 2009. So we're going, whatever the math on that is. Yeah, 12, 13 years. We have about 450 employees. We were in either 38 or 37 states. That seems to fluctuate on about a monthly basis, but we're growing. We're nationwide. Our biggest concentrations in California, Illinois, Ohio, and recently Wisconsin. But that's where everybody is. Let's see how many I skip over this time. So we have this as the title indicates, this is kind of a unique situation we have. It's unique for us too, us being Renovo. And to clarify, we're a medical asset management company, an ISO. We provide service as a service. We're involved with biomed, imaging, including LINACs, and life sciences. So I'll kick it back to Perry. You want me to just run this?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind doing that.
Yeah.
You seem to have a lighter touch on it than I do. Yeah, obviously I eat my Wheaties and something like that.
So he's going to have the weakling do it.
So we're going to be talking a little bit about mammography. That's kind of really the subject matter for today. And we're going to present it kind of in an interesting way. So we've introduced a little bit about Banner and a little bit about Renovo. But what's interesting when you kind of look at both of us for like, what is that sort of all about? We're actually competitors, okay? So when we're doing ISO work out there, a lot of times we'll end up competing over the same book of business. So what we're going to really suggest today, I think, is the big takeaway is, yeah, we'll talk about some things in mammo, but I think I also want us to talk a little bit about some, I think, big changing dynamics in healthcare, especially as we look in service and support, and that your competitors actually can become allies to you. And I think if we look things in the distant past, okay, that's not always been the case, right? It tends to have been a little bit tribalistic in some cases and all of that. So we're just going to give you a different way to look at a particular problem that we had, how we came together, sort of why we came together and all of that, and then a little bit about how that program's worked and a little bit about the preliminary results of that thus far. But to frame this for us, so what are we talking about really with mammography? So as of January 2022, and I went out there and just kind of researched the national stats on that, we're a little bit south right now in this country of doing 39 million mammography exams, right? So women's health just in general really is on the uptick in there. And so the fact that we're talking about mammography, I think, is not only germane right now, but as we project out in the future, there's just going to be more and more of these type services in here, which we're going to run into some common problems in that really as a result, I think, of these clinical statistics. And we know out there, at least if you know anything about this business, right, there is one dominant player in the field of mammography in the 2D and the 3D space. Not going to name them, but I think everybody knows who that is. Might start with the, no, I won't say that. Okay. But from a life cycle perspective on those, at least one of the things that we found in Banner, and I'm just going to kind of query around and see if it's common with some of your organizations as well, right, is that we found that the digital detectors probably are the most expensive thing really to maintain. They drive the life cycle. They really do. And one of the reasons why is because of that amorphous selenium. Okay, that thing by its very design has shelf life right out of the gate. Now, how much shelf life you're going to get out of that device is depending on how bad you beat them up, right? If you do a lot of studies in there, they're not going to last as long. If you're kind of a light user, and we have detectors out in some of our critical access facilities or out at a clinic, they don't get beat up quite the same way as they do in some of the high volume outpatient centers that we have that are doing screening and diagnostics, which is the other important thing as well, right? There's a difference, obviously, in how that detector is going to perform, whether you're a screening facility or if you're one that does incorporate diagnostics. So I think we're kind of probably okay with that dynamics, but I'm just kind of curious. Does it sound like a kind of a common set of parameters so far in mammography and all of that? Okay, I'm seeing some head nodding and all of that. So hopefully, again, this validates that we're talking about something relevant. Okay, so as we look at the OEM service options in there, well, what do we find? They don't really have a lot of flexibility to them, right? The offerings in there, they're pretty fixed. There's not a lot of opportunity in there to customize like we might find with other modalities. We start looking at the thing like the detector, we just established that as one of the weaker links in the system. What are our options really related to that? We got third parties out there really doing repair and stuff like that? Not really, right? So we have kind of limited choices when we're in this particular arena. And nice.
It was really just a matter of time.
Okay, and so, okay, we want to,
Did I skip one?
you got to go backwards.
All right.
All right, and if you're watching remotely, if you've recovered from whiplash yet, so, okay. So why is that? Well, the OEM, right, they have dominant market share, and so they have very tight control over their technology. And anytime you have somebody that's like that, you basically have what essentially becomes kind of a monopolistic kind of mindset, and you're typically not going to find a lot of options in that particular mindset. If we start looking at what full service is, relative again to comparing to other modalities, what we find out is that it's really disproportionate in the mammography space versus things that you can do in other modalities as well. So again, what does that do? It's driving less and less choice, flexibilities, and options to solve problems in this particular place. And interestingly enough, and I'm saying this from the perspective of a pretty strong in-house group, so you can get all kinds of training from this manufacturer and all of that. And normally training is a good thing, right? We build up our capability. That generally correlates to lower life cycle costs. And this modality, that doesn't necessarily gain you anything. And that's because that detector in there, like I said, is the Achilles heel. That's the thing that's going to burn you more often than not with these kind of programs. If you're running exclusively an outpatient imaging business, let's say that you're not a hospital, but you're freestanding in that regard, very, very tough to kind of operate under these particular parameters. So what are your service strategies, at least traditionally in this space, right? It's either full service, right? Or some people have played around. I've talked to people in the country that try to work out something in terms of detector pools because they've kind of figured out that's the weak link and try to manage around that. And I even know some colleagues in all of that that have gone bare. And the problem really that we've seen kind of with pools and going bare is that it's good when it's good, but then when things start crashing down on you and all of that, then you kind of find out, there's a little bit of that shoe dropping on the other side of the foot kind of mentality in there. And so that's really, really tough.
If I may, Perry.
Sure.
Another thing that's important to recognize from an ISO's point of view, anytime a customer for us anyway wants to go with the detector pool, we actually price it in a way that doesn't make sense for them to go that way. Because the accounting for us is a nightmare. That's one part. There's an administrative side, but it's unsustainable for us. So we that's the way we say no. In case I'm giving you a trade secret now. Whenever somebody prices something crazy, they just don't want to do it, and we fall into that pool too.
Yeah, well, and I think in doing so, right, what does that do? It's really going to kind of prevent the inevitable, because if you've been doing it a while, and I know some of you in here have, right, you're going to play this cycle out, and that's exactly what's going to happen. That's why we kind of pointed out, like, you can do that and you'll have the victory for a little bit. And like I said, the other shoe falls and it's like all of a sudden it goes, not a good idea, right? So if we can prevent you from kind of doing some things that we've done prior, that's part of the art in this as well, right? So that nobody has to kind of recreate the wheel. I think the other thing that we find out too, credible competitors in this space, right? And when I talk about credible competitors, what I'm talking about is from the capital acquisition side, right? It would be so nice, like you can in other modalities where we have credible competitors, to go, my vendor's not really treating me as well as I want to. So because of that, I'm going to choose kind of a plan B or a plan C. Yeah, we're going to really do that in mammo? I know people that have, right? And usually they're kind of sorry that they left the solution and all of that they were doing before. And that's why that particular supplier has the market share and all of that they do have, right? So all of this stuff, it's kind of funny. We try this, and we find ourselves all coming back to the same point, right? It's like, man, not really fixing the problem here. I just found a new route to go. I got kind of stalled out again. But there are some bright spots, and there should be, right? Is that anytime somebody sees common problems, and everything that we're talking about here probably is a problem that's common to a lot of organizations out there, you get people to step up that are trying to do some things to influence the outcome a little bit. So one of the things that we kind of found out there, there's some innovative third parties out there that are dabbling a little bit in detector repair and all of that. So let's say your inventory is kind of in the earlier vintages, right, of the mammography technology. There's kind of some options out there today that weren't out there, let's say 5 years ago in there. Those can be very helpful. The thing is in an organization of our size, yeah, I have a little bit of that older vintage, and I have a lot of things in the middle, and I have a lot of things that are fairly on the cutting edge side. So what happens to the middle and the cutting edge side? Not a lot of answers in there, right? The older I go back, I start to be able to pick up a couple of things in there. Now, if I start looking at that from a full asset management perspective, is that the way I want to manage my program? I'll quarantine off a little bit and go, I'm going to do this thing over here and then the rest of it over there. I would sort of submit from a quality control perspective, no. I mean, you could, but it's kind of hard to manage that, right? Because you got different, how are you going to ensure that one quality set from one is the same to the other?
Sorry. And in conclusion, I'm telling you. Yeah, I think so too.
I don't think that's going to improve things really a whole lot.
No, well, I was in this room last time. It was the same issue.
And then as I talked about, the competing OEMs are developing products to narrow the technology gap in there. So again, that does give you options, right? When you don't feel you have a credible competitor, right, whether it's on service and support or the capital side in there, again, you're a little bit more limited. So we are starting to see some technologies in there. I will, from my perspective anyway, I call it keeping up with the Joneses. I still haven't seen anybody really leapfrog the main guy, right? But there are things in there that are getting closer to the realm of reason. And so when you look at radiologists that specialize in mammography and all of that, they're a little bit more willing to look at some of the other offerings out there than they were in the past. But they'll tell you the same thing that I just did, is like, yeah, you know, it's not as good as what we were doing before, but plausible, right? It's passable. We can kind of do what needs to be done. And every once in a while, we'll make a test and banner in the market to kind of do that, because just we want to make sure that the market and all of that is honest. But at the same time, we don't really, I'll call it dipping your toe. It's not a full jump into the pool with another thing in there, because again, I don't really believe that the technology really is being leapfrogged. And so until that really happens, again, you find yourself kind of maybe trying some things which are gravitating back to where we started. So that's a little bit about how we see the dynamics in there. And one of the things that I was kind of curious about is how you, right, whether you're in the support side or if you're a hospital based person, right, running a program, does that resonate? I feel I'm using an MRI term. Maybe I should come with something like mammo. So.
You know, I was in line of health before I was director of imaging services for 2.5 years. We did them all in house. We had 29 2Ds and we converted them to 3Ds just as I was leaving. We were able to, the person who was running the program before me went there. Just cut the hospital off, the department off, said, Victor, we don't care, we need the money. And it was a nightmare. Mm-hmm. They made friends with the department because we ended up compromising their services and their revenues. So when I came in, it was a lot of hand holding and getting them to trust us. And while we were building the trust, we were also building a database of failure on detectors. Those were the two big things that we found, even though tubes aren't big. We found that there's a meter inside there that counts the number of exposures to the tube. And guess what? We were able to determine that about 70,000 exposures we could predict tube failure with.
Yeah, the glass.
The same with detectors. We were able to take the number of 2D images that they would take versus the 3D through CView. And working with our radiologists, we figured out that, you know, the compounding would come apart with a certain amount of radiation that the detectors were exposed. Typically about 3 to 3.5 years, depending on cases.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. No, I'd say that's about right. Okay, so that was an example of somebody kind of trying the bear route. So that kind of was one of the things that we said. Anybody ever done sort of pool management with detectors and all that? Yeah. Do you do that at Intermountain today, Mike? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I would say that.
Okay.
That vendor you're speaking of, I think the biggest issue in the last 12 months has been the reliability of tubes. Is their tube process has changed, and there was a lot of turnover of tubes in the last 12 months. I think one of the things that would be necessary for another OEM to become a major player in the space is what's that transition process? So if you wanted to sell me a gantry that's a different sticker on the outside, I've got to get all of my techs used to how your machine works. Got to get all my rads distributed on your machine. Got to maybe even change some of my work processes. You know, maybe we do lab first and right. You know, all those kind of things. There's no company that's wanted to get into that space that's also come up with a transition. Because the transition plan away from such a dominant market just is important. And I think that's the one piece that even if you build a better machine, you know, how what am I going to do? Replace an entire fleet in one day? No. Or replace them one at a time as they do. So what's that transition look? Nobody's come up with a good answer to that. That I think is also helping to preserve market share.
Yeah. I think Hologic kind of depends on that dynamic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. 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 They're a lot like we were speaking earlier about Intuitive Surgical. Intuitive Surgical kind of does the same thing.
To the two issues that you're seeing, about a year, they've actually existed for 2 years. Because we converted the 2Ds when I was at Alliant in late 2019, early 2020. Within 30 to 60 days, we were having 2 buildings. Our new system.
Wow.
They come in and replace it, and then all of a sudden I'm getting service calls. So it's been a couple of years. I talked to them about it. They don't really seem interested in changing anything.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so for those that are listening remotely, again, I don't know if some of the comments came across probably on our microphone. So let me just kind of reiterate some of it, Reader Digest version. Is that in addition, what we were kind of talking about credible competitors out there really in terms of the technology itself, the point that was made from Mike at Intermountain, right, is that you still have a user community out there, right, in the mammographers themselves and in the radiologists themselves getting used to a new technology. And we're familiar with that, right? And you start to mix standards and things like CT and MR. It's one set of challenges for the support environment. It's a completely different set of challenges, right, on the clinical operator side, right? So really, really important. So, you know, you've got the technology itself that speaks volumes in there. You have some really practical challenges in there doing that. And again, right, I think the manufacturers learned to really kind of capitalize really on all of that, right? It's not easy work at the end of the day. So appreciate you guys kind of sharing a little bit what's going on in your area. So what I'm going to do a little bit, and we're going to kind of get into our solution here in a little bit, but I'm going to walk you a little bit through some of the journey and all of that we took, because I think this is kind of unique. So we were approached, there's a number of us around the country, we're approached by Peter Venser, if that's a name that you know, from ESP Global. See some heads nodding in there, right? I figured somebody in the room would know who Peter is. He's been around. But he had sort of this notion out there, right, that there's a lot of people in the country that have this common problem in there. And he brought a coalition together of us. And when I say a coalition of us, what does that mean? That's hospital systems around the country and including outpatient imaging centers as well. Like-minded, okay? And the idea is that what we have going today could be a lot better than it is today. So the charge was, can we come up with something in here as a group that's better than what we're currently doing in here? And the example institutions that we had on here, you can see this is an interesting list of characters in there with Banner, Sutter, actually your group participated in that with us. We had some folks down in the Southeast, right, with North Georgia and Ochsner and the like. We had some outpatient imaging centers that are fairly large and pretty well known in there, again, that had common challenges as well. So a really interesting mix of people trying to get together, all these different cultures and facilities in here, but all were kind of raising their hands saying, yeah, we got a problem. We're hoping we can develop something new and different off of that, right? So same frustration in common. That was one thing I think that we had to make sure to kind of gel everybody together. And every site in here that sort of embarked in this conversation believed that somehow if you band a bunch of people together, right, even though we were a little bit different culturally and all of that, that maybe we could get something that was a little bit better than what each of us were doing individually. So in light of that, right, well, we had to establish a common charter and a mission. Okay, so we have an idea. So we formalized that a little bit in terms of what it is that we were going to do, which is to attack this space from a service and support side specifically, and then try to leverage it in a way really that exceeded quality. Okay, so as we continue kind of going along that journey, so the next thing that we did is we signed these participation agreements, and that was a really interesting thing, trying to get all of these organizations, legal departments and all of that together to kind of get a common framework together on that. That takes a little bit of time to do in there. I bet in your own individual organizations, it takes time to just get it done just with yourselves. Imagine trying to do that when you have kind of a conglomerate of people getting together. And another thing that we found along the way, this wouldn't be a surprise, right, if you're a hospital operator, is that a lot of us are entangled in one perspective or another to a group purchasing organization. And sometimes, depending on how that relationship is built, it may dictate certain things that you can do and not do related to support. And we tend to think of them a lot that more on the supply side, whether we're supplying consumables or whether we're supplying capital equipment and all of that. The GPOs and all of that are playing in the service space and all of that as well. And so as we started to tease that out of the process, we found nuances in there depending on what hospital was affiliated with what GPO. And then the outpatient imaging centers had their own GPO and different relationships in there. So that helped us to define a little bit really what the rules of engagement could be, things that we had to navigate around. So ultimately in all of this, after we got all of that done, right, a women's health RFP was put together in there, and it was presented. Actually, we opened it up to a number of people to participate, but these are the only 3 folks in there that really were interested in having the dialogue. We had GE, we had Renovo, right? We had the manufacturer and all of that themselves. He's just going to see if I can remember what happened on the past slide.
Sorry. Now I'm gun shy.
Okay, so once we got all of that squared away, then we had really to kind of put together some elements of program development in here, right? So we put together, right, the IDNs together that we're going to use this and the outpatient imaging centers. And we actually did have some outpatient imaging centers that stuck around for this. And then anytime you do this, you have to have some program requirements. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a subsequent slide. Right? We go through a request for information phase, presentation phase, and the word phase. And then this customized program development at Banner, I'm just going to put this there, and then we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what we did within it. But as I kind of laid this out, as you're going to go shop something out there, I think generally, whatever that is, right? My guess is for the most part, we're all going to some degree or another, conform to a process that looks familiar. So hopefully as you look at that, I don't think there's anything really rocket science and all of that about that. But I'll ask for comment because again, there's a lot of individuality here kind of in this room today. So that statement sort of makes sense. And as you're kind of scanning through it, do you see anything that you would incorporate in the process in there? And we'll just... Yes.
So, quantify the number of systems that coalition represent. So, either number or some kind of percentage. I mean, it seems massive, the number of systems you have, or a percentage of the install base.
I think when we started out, we were probably a little bit north of 400 systems all in with all of the facilities that we had in it. Now, the question that you asked and where we landed at the end of the day varies a little bit, right? Because some people kind of dropped along the way in this particular process. But when it started out, that's kind of when we were looking at. So when you had at least the initial conversations, right, with the manufacturer and others, right? That's a pretty formidable list of things that you're bringing to the marketplace. And that, by the way, is the object. That's exactly what we were looking for. Okay.
This is actually the correct slide. If you will, I didn't talk a lot about the preamble to this because I wasn't even with the company at the point, but I am intimately familiar with these requirements. Company culture, I would say that was probably the most important thing that Renovo considered, because if it had to be a partnership, we had to sit down like adults if any in the whole process of rolling out the program. We wanted a partner to come back and say, hey, this is what we thought was going to happen, but this is what happened. What can we do, correct it, and collegially come together and have an environment like that of collegiality and partnership. Technical service competencies. We wanted, Hologic was going to identify how they were going to do it. Everybody knows how they do it. GE, everybody knows how GE multi-vendor does it, and how Renovo does it. We needed to explain how we were going to actually provide that service. We had to be able to do it across the country, because as you saw that whole list of entities, you had folks in the Southeast, you had Banner in the western part of the United States. These folks were spread all over the place. Hopefully that fixed it. These folks are spread all over the place, so we couldn't be a regional organization. We had to be able to respond throughout the country. Again, responsiveness, uptime, critically important to the clinicians and to us as well. Call management, how calls are dispatched, how the handoff happens, how escalation happens. Track and reporting involves service reports, of course. Who needs what service reports? We have a database. They have a database. We need to fulfill all those requirements to make sure we, for agency compliance, we continue doing that. Ability to leverage in-house resources, and we'll talk more about that later. Cost, of course, is a big thing. I always wonder where we should put cost up here, probably right under culture. And other value adds like upgrades, consumables, accessories, things like that, the ability to provide those.
So a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, on that prior slide. It is extremely deliberate to talk about the culture, mission, and vision part of this when you embark on something like that. So kind of in keeping with ISO certification. So we have a number of ISOs that are in here. Most of you, right, have either 9001, 13485, or probably in a process, to do that, right? So there's a company drive now and a business need around quality management systems and the like. And I don't think that's different for what I would say leading healthcare organizations as well. So we may be seeking the same certifications, like in our organization we are, but if not, we're looking for ways to emulate it, right? You don't necessarily have to have it really to kind of conform to what those things are. But I think those are extremely important, because if you're going to partner with people in there, you really got to be drinking out of the same trough on a lot of different things. And so we spent a lot of time just vetting people. Never mind what the rest of the program requirements are. It's like, are we enough aligned as businesses and all of that this is even going to work? Or is one going to sort of shoot the other in the foot, or, it doesn't quite add up? So a lot of time was spent on that. That's why that was number one on the bullet point. The other part that was interesting about that, did you see where cost was? I think a lot of us, right, in the support side, we're driven by cost. Our engineers manage their performance in a lot of cases by how they save money, right? Cost is a big deal and is important to us. And there's no question in running a healthcare organization that we're all trying to figure out, right? If you're a support entity anyway, you're in a cost out business. That's what we do, right? We're trying to figure out ways to wring cost out of the system. So why would I put that so low? Because what's important in the mammography space is that you got to get all of these other things right. And the hope is that you spend the time and energy on that, you can get cost eventually to take care of itself. So it's not to say that cost is not important, right? But put it in the right place, because if you're making decisions on cost, you're going to have some challenges in this space, I assure you. So I just kind of want to put out, there is actually a deliberateness in there to how that list and all of that was comprised.
Okay, so whenever the list of service delivery providers were provided, as we stated earlier, there was an OEM in there, there was a multi-vendor service provider, Renovo, and of course we have to take in considerations the ENTECH group as well. I think one of the other groups that ended up taking the bid had a similar structure as Perry's, but not quite the same. And we'll talk a little about the diversity among those groups later on. But it was spread across, all these people got invited. It's an OEM, ISO, and Perry's group was involved. Any questions? Yeah. All right.
All right, so as we're kind of going through, all right, what are the other steps along the way in a little bit more detail? So we have conversation, obviously, with these providers that we thought kind of met the earlier criteria, right? We had alignment, we thought they had the capability, they had the breadth, they could serve all of the customers in the coalition, all of those usual things. So then we had to develop an RFI to sort of establish what the program baselines and all of that were going to be, and whether the participants or not can even meet really what those requirements are. And as you would expect, given the diversity kind of a cast of characters that we had in here, there was a lot of iterative design, because we had to kind of figure out how to make the refinements necessary, because of the fact that we are disparate. It was not a monolithic group. So even though we had a fair amount of commonality on some things, the reality is operationally speaking, we run like different entities in there, right? So we were just as interested in understanding ourselves as a coalition, what our differences were. And then of course that had to be communicated to anybody that was going to bid and participate on this, really from the support and service side. Site visits and presentations kind of goes along with the territory, right? So we had to go out in some cases to kind of see things. One of the reasons actually why we did the GE site visit, we didn't really need a site visit to go out and review a support plan for mammography, but GE's angle on it is hey, we're a manufacturer, we're involved in mammography. How could some of our technology sort of play into the support problem and all of that you're solving? So they were kind of coming at it from the credible competitor perspective, right? And we would expect that, right? Being an OEM as well as being in the multi-vendor service space. So that was kind of interesting. What Hologic and Renovo did, the other participants in here, is they just kind of came out and they did presentations to the group. And because we're disparate and we're all over the country, we would not bring us all together to a central location. So that meant they had to kind of travel about the country, right? Kind of like a little dog and pony show in there, and reach all of those different customers in terms of what their potential offerings and all of that might be. And once we kind of did all of those things, we did eventually then get down, as you would expect, right into a formal request for proposal in there, where we started to look at pricing. So now we've explained that probably in about 5 or 6 slides in there, but the net result of this is 18 months of work. This took a lot of time, back and forth, doing this, meetings with each other, going here, going there, doing all of this different things in here. So certainly if you're going to embark along something like that, you got to understand it's going to have a lot of steps and twists and turns and all kinds of things to it. So plan accordingly, right? I don't think there's too many organizations around the country that can band together, wave their hands, and bam, have agreement on a program and all that. It does take a little bit of time to put that in there. But the point is, again, if you're like-minded and you work off a common charter and the like, it's possible to get there. And we did, but it still took this kind of time to put that together. I think the other thing that was important for us, right, as we're looking to get an outcome, is we didn't want it to be so non-binding that it would be problematic. And you might say, but you all got together to begin with. What do you mean you don't want a binding thing at the end of the day? You still want flexibility even at the end? The reality is that you do, because again, it's not a monolithic system, right? The needs on the outpatient imaging side are different than the critical access facilities, that are different from the community-sized facilities, the tertiaries and the quaternaries, and all kinds of versions and all of that in between. So you wanted aspects of the solution to be binding, but you also need components in there to recognize that who am I as the customer in there? I'm going to need certain things, right, to be adjusted to conform to our business. So as we were meeting with our suppliers and all that, we had to make sure, again, cultural alignment. Are you going to be willing to do that with us, right? When we get down to the final step, are you going to lock us into one answer, which almost takes us back to the original problem that we were trying to solve, right? That is really what we were interested in. So flexibility and the idea of being customizable, right, was going to be pretty important in there. And I think the other thing that's important too is that after all of this work, right, you could still opt out if you wanted to, right? So there was still freedom in there, right, to opt in and opt out. The other thing that we had in here too, I think I had this on a future slide as well, is that we had the opportunity after the solution was developed to add customer base actually into the solution. And the beauty of that is that assuming somebody in the room here liked what we did and you wanted to join in, you could join in and it would be very easy, right? Because we have all this groundwork and all of that laid and can tell you all the ins and outs about it, right? Then you can kind of stare at it a little bit. Again, customize and refine that to what and the way your organization works, right? And be able to opt in whatever capacity and all of that made sense.
Sweet.
Okay, so I think that's where we were. Okay. So functionally speaking, after we get through all that, we had 3 basic clients and all of that ended up going with the Renovo coopetition partnership that we'll talk about in here. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of the time frame in there. And the middle point in there really just talks about the people that kind of stuck it out to the end. So you'll notice in there, it's like, okay, well, that's 3 people. What happened to everybody else? Okay. Well, there could.
What happened to Sutter?
Sure.
One of the things was the price point at the time. We have a program as well with about 4 or 5 dedicated medical specialists. And we've been struggling with everything that's very emergency. Tooth failure, detector failure. I would say 6 years ago, tooth failure was very common. For a lab system, we're replacing tubes every 2 years. We also have volumes that contribute to that. But long story short, the reason we didn't fully dive into that was one was the price point. We had a fairly mature program where our price point was good from a cost of service standpoint. And the other thing I was sharing with Dan earlier is I'm not sure how everybody else is addressing it, but there's a software upgrade for the software vision that we are in play right now. We've been on a contract for about 7 years, so we got a $1.4 million expense coming our way on a TM basis, but we're not on a contract. So that's the biggest issue that we did try to address. So that was the other part of the upgrades. And the price at the time was change from year to year. And that's what's actually driving our decision to share with everybody. Potential relation to a lot of the PC upgrade, not only work around. We can build our own PCs, but we can't install our own software. So we're in those negotiations right now. So this is actually very true to our heart. The last thing we would like to do is go with an OEM contract, but the way it's playing out, the software. Fortunately, that's my process of that decision. They're doing it first. Right? Absolutely.
Sure they are.
Yeah.
A lot of it's done that since I've been in this industry as an engineer, so we've been avoiding that relationship, but we're we might have no. I get it.
Yeah.
We're going to a multi-year agreement to get that. Excuse me, Lodge is locking you into a multi-year.
They're trying to, when I share with everyone in this room, we've been negotiating price with them for 6 years. And we've always said, no, and we'll see where we're going. But Harry and their team is a big part of it. I think we all need to kind of gather together on how we can launch our time that they treat us all the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Can I
Okay, so we're kind of down here at the last thing. So actually, it took 160 days, actually, with us kind of talking with Renovo about that to kind of iron out really the way the details of our relationship and all of that is going to work. So again, that even puts you down. So the whole process from the overall perspective, about 18 months. Then you finally get down in here where you can really get into the nitty-gritty details really of a conversation. And even still, that took us a while to really kind of work out the mechanics of that. So it gives you kind of a sense of time in there, okay? All right, so what the heck is it that we did really at the end of the day, right? That's what everybody's interested in. It's like, yeah, process this, process that.
Banner
sorry.
doesn't
And
do
it's like,
memo anymore. They just dump the program. It's too expensive.
okay, so it's quite obvious. you know, we partnered with Renovo really in this particular program. And the idea was to deliver the service that we have been, but in a little bit a traditional way, right? Because here we are as kind of in a lot of settings, competitors with each other that kind of collaborated together to do something a little bit differently. And that's exactly what that says. So each system in our program right now is covered really by a flat fee that's all inclusive, right? So if I even want to do things really around software upgrades and all of that, I have the capability to get there and a bunch of other things as well. And I'll explain a little bit about how that works. But it's at a much reduced rate. So we're not really big on doing a contractual or a subscription-based thing, probably any more than the rest of you in here that do at least in-house work and all of that in there. But in this particular case, it actually made sense relative to what we were comparing against at that point in time to actually do just that at the end of the day. And obviously by making a model that's revenue predicted by our partner and all of that, right, it opens up the opportunity to put all of these little extras and the like really into the program. So what exactly happens here? I did not cut my people out of the program. As a matter of fact, it's featured in the program by design. It's meant for my team to go out and do all of the same things that my team was doing before. So just like, you know, was explained earlier, right? We have an in-house program, we have a mammo group and all of that. We're perfectly capable going out and doing our own PMs and all of that. It wasn't about throwing our hands up in the air and turning the service itself over to another provider. So we keep that. But we actually get paid for the work that we do in this particular structure, right? And so by recognizing a little bit, we're giving our partner a little bit of predictive revenue. We get a little bit of a bonus back in our department for any service request and all of that that we fulfill. And that's pretty cool because I would imagine the way that we work the numbers is, right? The revenue side is still pretty good, even paying us to do that. But our guys now actually get credit, right? We're able to put that against our ENTECH books in there for the service and all of that that we perform. Now, that's an interesting model. I haven't seen a lot of that model out there, and that's kind of why we wanted to share that with you a little bit, because I think that's a little bit unique. It's just a unique structure that we came up at the end of the day, okay? Now the reality is that, okay, so what happens if you can't fulfill the service end to end? On preventative maintenance, that's usually not an issue. But some service events and all of that, we do get a stumper every once in a while, and we need help, okay? The way the traditional sort of hospital third-party arrangement would work is I would look to my third party to solve that particular problem. We actually have the OEM solve that particular problem. So what Renovo is doing for us is not bringing Renovo resources out there. They broker the original equipment manufacturer for us. The original equipment manufacturer is our backup, okay? That's a pretty cool piece of the program, right? Imagine talking to your customers about that. They go, hey, well, that's not a bad deal. You know, I like you guys and all of that. I see you every day and all of that. But if I know I do this arrangement in here and then who's going to be your backup? It's the OEM. Hey, it's not a bad deal. I don't have to do a lot of arm twisting with people, in other words, in order to do that. So another interesting characteristic in this particular program. It's a sprint to the end. We really want to be done. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure how to.
You get it on PC?
Yeah, that's what we're going to
Yeah,
have to.
Sorry, guys.
I could be a clicker if you want.
You know, we may need that, Nick.
Yeah.
See if we can collapse that down. Okay, get that there. Okay, did I get it back? I think I got it back, okay.
That's it. That's the right one. I think I'm gonna ditch this.
Okay. We've been relegated to hitting the arrow on the computer now. Is that how it's going to go? Okay. Yeah, I think everybody's probably been whiplashed enough. Okay.
So
Please.
So the program prep, it took about 60 days, and the program preparation, and when we say the program, Renovo is the program administrator. And when you see program, you're talking about Renovo, if you see the word program in there anywhere. So the prep was done in conjunction with Perry's team. We had them go out, do what we call pre-inspection forms. We made sure we knew the material status of every device out there, whether it was a mammo, stereotactic, a prone, everything they wanted to put on the program. We took a look at it, and Perry's team actually was involved with that because they know where all the devices are, first of all. And I think we sent a couple of guys out to help in a few places. But we brought all that data in. They shared a lot of their information from their database with us as far as what things were called, and we put that into our database. We just translated that all to our database and started going through doing the inventory verification. Once we were comfortable with that, we used all the data that Perry's team already had to build the PM schedules. So after that, and I think this is what all the things that happen here are things that are already historically what Renovo does as a company operation. So it wasn't a huge stretch. We're more of a pull economy than a push economy. So, and what I mean by that is we try to satisfy different needs of different, entities. So there's not a one size fits all for us, just in general. That's how we do business. So we developed how to do the incoming service calls, hands off between Perry's team and ours, how escalation work, kind of all the stuff that I mentioned earlier, documentation, invoicing, billing out service. And when we're talking about billing out services, we're talking about Renovo paying ENTECH for the labor that they put in, and customer education. Perry will speak a little bit more about customer education.
And then while we're advancing the slides, so the thing I would say about the 60-day period, there isn't anything magical about that, but it's just kind of the time that it took us to do that. The objective is that you want to sit down and build your processes of how your companies are going to interrelate ahead of time. And then you want to storyboard scenarios so that when you go to deliver service, you know what it is that you're going to deliver, expecting all the usual hiccups and how you're going to navigate each other through those particular things. So that's the point that I want us to highlight on the 60-day thing is take your time in this area before you implement, you're going to have a better result. Yeah.
So currently Renovo, the program has 68 systems under its wing. Again, that's 2D mammo, 3D mammo, stereotactic, prone, upright, everything. When we talk about inventory, we kind of made it simple for us. We just took what their asset number was, and that became our asset number. And that's kind of what everything is contingent on. Think of it in terms of a pivot table. We're all pivoting off the same number. Now, Hologic has their own number for it. And, facilities may have their own number at Banner as well. But that's kind of the linchpin for this whole operation to work. We have to call them the same what we call a CE number. Make and model, configuration, age of the panel is incredibly important, and we'll have a slide talking about that later. PM schedules, every once in a while we still find out that we're not together on the PM schedules, but that every month there's usually one addition or one correction that we still do. As Perry had mentioned, it's an iterative process, and we're still in that iterative process. And another thing we looked at past service histories. Perry's team had done such a good job with these, though, that I don't recall that there were any that we just rejected. I think everything that was proposed came onto the program inventory.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring that up, there's just times, not at Banner, but other places where we're going, yeah, we're just not going to cover that, and we give them good reason to. So we spent exactly, and that's what those inspections were for before.
You know, and to that point, so what could happen, right? Because again, you're talking about entities across the country, right? So I don't care who's handling it, right? You're going to run into all kinds of different pre-existing conditions and the like. I don't think pre-existing conditions, at least for me personally, is a deal killer for anything. It's a price influencer maybe,
Yeah.
right? In terms
Yeah.
of how you structure it, but it's not a deal killer, right? You can you still can structure programs kind of similar to this. That would
Yeah.
be my punchline anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the case. But like I said, Perry's team did a really good job maintaining these things. I don't even think that issue came up. So this is a bit of an eye chart. So I'm going to kind of briefly go through how the calls work. So the calls come in from the end users usually to the ENTECH dispatch center. From there, one of two things can happen, and it'll be like a dichotomous key as we go down the line. But either the ENTECH, one of Perry's teams, they can go to the site and start working on it, or they can immediately turn around, call the program administrator, which happens to be me right now. Well, my boss, because I'm here. But call their program administrator, say, hey, I'm about to put in a call with your call center. Keep an eye out for it. So that kind of puts it on alert. As soon as it comes up in our call center, we go ahead, we open the call in our database, we create a PO, and we dispatch Hologic. So those are the two primary things that can happen. Another thing that can happen is that one of Perry's techs, and this happens every once in a while, one of Perry's techs can go look at this and say, I need a little help. They call us, hey, I know this has already started, but I want to turn this back over to you guys. And so the same thing happens. We'll open a call. There's fluidity in what happens in there, and I think that's one of the benefits. They can call us at any point in the service chain and say, we need your help. Again, we'll cut the PO, we'll open the case with Hologic, we'll dispatch Hologic. After that, we collect the service reports. We give them to Perry's team. Whoever needs them, we put them in our database. We make sure their database is up to date, and then we close the call. That's the nuts and bolts of how we do call management.
So a couple questions I have for you, Dan, kind of on that is that, it starts out, okay, ENTECH is going to make a phone call to you. Does direct customer ever kind of mess up the front end of the process and call you directly?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
And it's not a huge deal. and I think the ENTECH team did a really good job of educating our common customers now. Very seldom does this happen. But yeah, whenever that happens, I say, I'll take care of it. If I can usually go ahead and dispatch the call, then I will reach out to one of his directors and say, hey, I don't know who covers Del Webb, but you're going to see a call for this pretty soon. I've already got it. It's already dispatched. Let me know just confirm that you have this. Actually, I'm trying to think in the last 2 months if that's happened at all. It happened a few times at the first when I wasn't involved so much with the administration. But yeah, we make sure and let them know. And there was one time about a year ago where that happened, and we actually had to pull the dispatch back because they didn't, the ENTECH team didn't know there was a problem until we told them there was a problem. We've already dispatched. Oh wait, cancel that dispatch. We'll take care of it. And so again, it's very fluid and very collegial, and it works pretty well.
And then Dan, let's say, we've got all of this flowed out, right? We've played a lot of scenarios out. What if we have to do call escalation, right? It's inevitably some call in there is just going to, get biffed one way or the other.
Yep.
How does that sort of work within this process?
That's a great question. And so Renovo has, this is the process we have for our relationship with ENTECH. We have an internal process for escalation. And I'm going to kind of address your question two ways. So in the big picture, Kevin and I are directors of imaging service. We kind of operate at the area service manager level. So if there's a problem, I have no problem getting on the phone and calling the Hologic area service manager. But if it looks like it's going to be a big problem, I usually call my boss, Al Moretti. I know some of you guys know him. Just call my boss and say, hey, we're having a little trouble with response or confusion on a part or things like that. Can you go ahead and call the VP of service? So I kind of come at it from an area service manager point of view. He comes at it from the VP. And so between those two things, one of us is going to get some traction. I admit it's usually Al first, but we get some traction. So in terms of single events, that's how call escalation works at kind of the micro level for us. But we also have this process, and we do this for every call, and especially when there's a mammo down. And this is, again, this is a routine that we have in Renovo. It's called the critical device alert. So every time I get a call and dispatch, anytime I dispatch Logic, I send an email out. Here's what time the call came in. Here's the problem. This is what I've done, and it usually amounts to I've dispatched to Logic, and here's the case number. Here's the PO number. Here's the asset number. Here's the location. It's a Selenia 3D, and I put that all on one email. And who's on the email? The owners of our company actually get a copy of that email along with the imaging leadership, but it's also the service leadership from ENTECH too. And if I happen to know the service guy's name from ENTECH, then I'll put that on the call too. And if I know the customer's name and have their email address, I will put them on it too. And every time there's a service update that comes, part ordered or part received, I'll send out an update, just keep it on the same thread. And that lets their customer know, our common customer know, it lets Perry's management team know, and it lets our management team know exactly where we are with that service event. So that's kind of those are the two answers to the same question, I guess. So that's how we do calls. I kind of already walked through that, how an incoming call comes in. This is the CDA process for the updates. Timely service reports. I got to tell you, I thought our relationship, our T&M relationship with Hologic was going to be hostile. It's not. It's actually been very good, and they're very responsive. I will admit they're more responsive than I thought they were going to be. I would say that right now for us, the weak link in the chain is getting documentation from Hologic. As it relates to their service, I have access to their service portal, and if anybody's spent any time in the Logic service portal, it doesn't always work. 50% of the time would be awesome. But that right now, that's the weak link. So we're working with the Logic currently to try to fix that. But if we're having that problem, Logic internally is having the same problem. So going back to the service report attributes, again, we share asset tags. We just use their same number. The problem, what we're doing to resolve it, if there's parts, and itemized labor on the service reports. That's our service report, and that's the banner. Another scenario I want to bring up that I kind of forgot about, Perry, was sometimes one of Perry's guys will go take a look at something and realize, oh my goodness, I need a part for this. I need a compression pad. I need a compression pad motor, whatever. They may be knee deep into this service event, and they'll call me and say, hey, I want to order a part. That's all I want to do. So I just go ahead, get the PO for the part. It's not like I have to get with my management and say, well, how are we going to source this part? There's no discussion about that. We go straight to a Logic. We order the part and have it delivered to one of Perry's guys. I forgot about that scenario. All right. So build back. So shortly after the end of every month, I get kind of a rundown from somebody in Perry's administrators that says, hey, here's our work order number, was it billable? They just send me every Hologic service event that they went to. I take this, and they also send me their service reports. And there's two things that are important about that. I take those service reports, put them in my service event, in my database, and make sure I'm taking care of our database. But I go through these, and I issue a PO, after I tally all these labor hours that Perry's team does, issue them a PO and they invoice us. So that's how the bill back is actually very easy. They send me a list of things they went to. I check the service records that they sent me and send a reconciled sheet back to them with a PO. They send me an invoice. That's how the bill back process works. I'll let you take this
You're
one.
gonna let me take that one. Okay, so customer education around this is really important, right? Because we've structured something in here a lot, very unique, a lot of things kind of moving back and forth like that. So first thing that we did with our customers out there, our endpoint customers, is orientation to this program. Because if we didn't do it, imagine how this is going to look to people in there. They're going to be like, Renova, what do they do? How does this work? And all of that, right? So sit down and kind of explain them really what the features and all of that are. And as we talked about, the intake process in here is really important. In our organization, we want all service, and most in-house organizations are like that. You want it to flow through you. It's no different in here. It flows through us, right? We'll initiate a communication with Renova. And it's why I asked the question that I did, because every once in a while, right, you get clinical staff turnover and all that, and that person didn't get the memo and they call service the way that they are kind of used to calling in service, right? So this is a constant thing that we have to do to get everybody to understand how that works. And then also to trust. It's not so much how, but it's really to trust that service escalation is going to work. So we explained to them how that is, right? And how closely it's being monitored on the back end. So if we have one that starts to go a little bit south, it doesn't go there perpetually, right? After certain time milestones, if something hasn't happened, it triggers events in there to kind of get that service event back on track. It's extremely important. And that's also a really good customer sales point. They like the fact that you kind of think through those scenarios when they come up. God willing, we don't want it to be a routine event, but you'd have to know what to do when it does happen out there. And then there's the service delivery process communication. That's something that we've worked on as well, where things don't happen just instantaneously in some of these repairs, right? And so we've got a nice process put together that's kind of synchronized in there. The customer gets very timely. They get very, there's a lot of, I would say, consistency in how that's done, because we don't turn it over to 500 people to be the messenger, right? There's one messenger that kind of does this in a certain way all the time. It's a very good way, keeps everything kind of streamlined for the customer. It's something that they expect. It's something that is predictable. And with something like this, again, I talked about staff turnover, where there's a myriad of reasons in here where you want to keep in front of your customer on a program like this. We just decided from the beginning, we didn't have anything go bad. We just decided from the beginning that we're just going to set this up just to understand how things are really working in the field. Is it doing what we expect it to do? Where can we improve? Where is it not so great, right? So we can kind of fix that up. And by the way, tell us if it's working well and all of that. I think sometimes we're so hardwired that everything's going to be a mistake all the time, right? Or we got to recover from something. It's like, well, if it's working well, say that too, because that kind of helps us kind of go back to some of our initial planning and go, hey, these steps in here actually worked, right? So I don't have to tweak those and all of that as much, right? The other thing that we do too is we're always going to look at outstanding service events. And what I would say, fortunately in this program, we don't have too many, but there is no such thing as utopia out there. They do happen. So when they do happen, we like to go back forensically, understand what happened, why did it happen, right? And it's all about understanding it well enough so that you can make the adjustments necessary, hopefully to prevent that particular issue from cropping up again.
Down on the job.
So the reason actually kind of why we're speaking to you guys here today is that we didn't just do this yesterday. We're in the third year of the program, right? So we've done this a while, kind of worked it out in there. We felt it was really at a point where we could share it because we have it pretty well working now on autopilot. Okay, we kind of know what's going to happen with each other in there.
That's the way it looks to Perry. The autopilot part. We're wrapping it up.
And as I said earlier, this is the easiest program in the world really to sell to customers once they really start understanding what you're doing. And the reason why is that they were used to us seeing running around the facility and all of that. And they said, is that going to change? Nope, it's going to be the same people that you're used to seeing. Call comes into ENTECH just like you're used to doing today and all of that. That's a trusted process, right? So we don't want to take the thing that's actually working in the process and try to figure out something different than that. That part worked okay. We kept that. The other thing that we were looking at is somebody that is competent enough to do call and asset management, because all of the back and forth that we're doing in here, it sounds simple. It is not simple. It is really easy to mess these things up, right? And what Dan and the group do is they really bring an expertise in here, really just keeping on top of things, right? The stuff that goes well, the stuff that's not going well. The customer is always informed, and we're informed as the partner in there. Really, really important. They get the benefit of response time. If I have to wait for Hologic to do everything on the front end side and all of that, I'm going to have service delay. So again, that's where we get to kind of leverage abilities in there, because we're there running around all of the time, right? So we're still delivering that faster response time really than anybody else can put out there. And then the other advantage that we get is we're not going around sourcing parts and stuff from all over the place in there, right? Which we've already determined on some of the newer things you can't get and all of that anyway. So why do I want to induce all that variance and all of that in there? We're able to use OEM parts. That works for the customer. They like hearing that, right? And they also like the fact that when we get jammed up on labor, whether we either need help with a call or, as I mentioned earlier in here, we have a lot of openings and all of that right now. Sometimes for me, it's a matter of you can't be 2 or 3 places at one time. So I need somebody else handling that one while we're doing that one, right? The fact that we do that and that's the OEM, again, very easy to sell that in there. And what I would say at the end of the day, because we're not trying to go out there and do a bunch of different things in the same space, right? The less variance you put in any process, which should happen, you got tighter control over the quality that you deliver at the end of the day. And I think that's really kind of the name of the game. The other name of the game is cost. It goes back, why do I have it so far down and in the back? Because again, it comes from this belief that if you do the right things structurally, you spend time with your processes and the arrangement that you put together, cost is going to take care of itself. And so what we were doing prior, and we tried all these different machinations that we kind of heard about earlier and all of that, kind of been there, done that. None of them really worked for me at the end of the day. Like, we're going to give this a try. We're going to get a run of data in here and see where we are at the end of the day. And so far, we're putting together some really impressive program savings. So I think we kind of got there. Now, is that a program for everybody? Man, that remains to be seen, right? You got to do your own due diligence, as they say, if you're investing in the like, but it has worked for us. We've tried a few things. We struggled in this place. And so this one's actually working for us pretty well.
One thing I want to add about response time is Banner had the advantage of being the third partner that came on. So we kind of had a run rate with North Georgia and Huntsville Health. And whenever we started those, our main concern was, are they going to treat us like the red-headed stepchild because we're going risk on them? And our experience was, no, they had the same response time. And this is coming from the customer. They had the same response time as before. And I know a lot of times OEMs, and this, I mean, this is true of all the OEMs, anytime you go away from them, one of the first things you're going to bring up is, well, we're going to take care of our contract customers first. Well, it's a concern, but I'm telling you, we haven't seen that. But we have 600 mammos under us too, so that may have some influence. I don't know, but that was a concern. I don't want to kind of skip by that and say, oh, it'll take care of itself. It did not take care of itself, but that it was a lot of us talking to Hologic, and they've actually been very cooperative with us. So whenever we have our business reviews, this is just 4 examples of things that we bring back to Banner and say, this is what's going on. Here's some repair histories, monthly repair histories. The green part is work that ENTECH did, and this is the total. So we like to kind of keep the percentage, kind of understand the percentages of who's doing what, these accounts. So I guess the way to look at that is that's everything Hologic did, you know. For service history, average time to completion, this is something we spend a lot of time talking about. This is one of those indicator graphics where all these, they're down around here, kind of where you expect them to be, with the multi-care platinum stereotactic system. Why is that? Well, To be honest with you, we haven't figured out why it is yet. But we do know that it takes more time for these than it does for these other platforms. But if we didn't look at things like that, wouldn't even know to look. So we'll eventually figure out why that's an outlier. Going back to the bill backs, total reimbursements from February of 2021 to July. This is everything that went back. And this is for 2021 and 2020. That's the latest year, and this was the year before. So that's important to Perry's team. And another thing that's really important for Perry's team and the clinicians and the administration in terms of capital replacement, we keep track of how old all the detectors are. So that's why that graphic is important. But these are just 4 examples of things we talk about in our reviews, business reviews. I'm not going to address this because it'll sound self-serving. So I'll let Perry take it.
Well, so interestingly enough, anytime that I'm presenting anything, right, I always like to do a lessons learned side or another consideration. And it comes from the perspective that, you know, very rarely do you implement something, right, and it all works as kind of advertised from day one. I don't know about you, but I haven't had many that there's always something in there that kind of hiccups and you go, wow, I didn't think of that thing or this thing and all of that. And when we run across those, we actually like to share those as well. I think it's important, right? Because what we're trying to do here is just kind of throw out ideas and get educated on different things and that. The amazing thing about this one in there, and that's why I talked about that 60-day kind of timing that we took before we implemented everything to storyboard things out. We were mapping out scenarios and all of that. We pretty much got them from day one. It's absolutely amazing. I haven't had one that really works like that before. So does that mean that we're overly smart people? No, I don't think so. I think what it is that we weren't in a hurry. And I think with anybody in the room, when you're not in a hurry, right, and you're really thinking something out and all of that, you can really do good work. I think that is the lesson. You just take your time and be very deliberate about what it is that you're doing, right? And you have the opportunity timing wise. Let's face it, we were already 18 months into it. We had time to do that, right? Why not spend the extra 60 days, right, to really make that well so that the customer facing side and all of that is going to be very strong. I think it's one of the biggest punchlines really that I had in the whole thing.
Yeah, I would say also culture lends itself to this. I think if ENTECH had a different culture or we had a different culture, this slide probably wouldn't exist. There would have been problems, but I think we just play off each other very well. I think we understand ENTECH's needs. I think ENTECH understands what we do, and it works out very nicely. So we're tickled to death about it.